Hey everybody. Back in 2012, I was able to sit my mum down in front of a camera and talk to her about her life, transition from Tasmania to Victoria, with a lot of detail about her life as a child and as a teenager in Tasmania. There's a lot of stuff she talks about which I had never heard of before. She passed away in 2017, nearly 91. At her funeral, I gave a 10-minute edited version of this whole thing. This is the whole 50 minutes.
Born in 1926 in Hobart, yes. My mother was working in the hop fields around Hobart. My father, as far as I know, started his bakery trade, and they decided to come to Devonport. And we came on a motorbike and side car from Hobart to Devonport. I have a picture of me as a baby in the side car. Came to Devonport, and my father once again got a job as a baker. And hadn't been there very long. My mother told me when she saw a job advertised in Latrobe, Wells Bakery, Latrobe. So we came to Latrobe. We had our own home, and life revolved around the bakehouse, and it was in the Depression years, and we had people knocking on our door for 6 pennyworth or 3 pennyworth of stale bread because they didn't have anything to eat. That was the Depression years.
So you came up from Hobart during the Depression or just before?
Well, I guess the Depression was beginning, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
I was a baby, but we came to Devonport, and well, my father was fortunate in that he got a good job in the bakery. And it was all very fortunate. There were so many people on the dole, so many people, especially in Latrobe. The men didn't have work. The kids didn't have very much, but I was very fortunate. The house was provided, went along with the bakehouse job, and I had piano lessons, so I really was very fortunate in my childhood. Home life was not the best. My mother and father fought and argued a lot, but well, we sort of got used to that way of life. And then I had another sister, 4 years between us. I only went to the state school. I left when I was 13, left school when I was 13, simply because of the other kids. I didn't get on very well with the other kids. They thought I was a goody-goody, and I would not become involved in the things they used to get up to. I'd go with them, and when I saw what was going on, I would run away and go home. So the other kids did not like me very much. But I had my friend Eunice. We were great pals, and we had a bike. When I left school, I was able to buy myself a bike, and we rode for miles, way out in the country, Sassafras, Wesleyvale, right out in the farmlands. We had a great time, Eunice and I, or we'd go to Devonport, 7 miles, ride there, ride back. And we had a great time, the pair of us, of a weekend. Also, I went to church. My grandfather, at the age of, when I was 3, he took me to church, and I can still see him and myself always late, even though we didn't live far from the church, always late, creeping into the back seat in the church. That was my grandfather and I. So that started me on going to church. There I stayed for the rest of my life. My grandfather was a lovely old Christian man. He was my father's father, yes. My mother's father was a bad-tempered, red-haired old Englishman, and I didn't like him very much, but I remember he was very mean, and I can remember he had an orchard of some sort, and I can remember picking an apple off the tree, and I got into a terrible trouble because I picked an apple, and you just didn't do that with my grandfather. So I guess my mother's red hair and her temper, that's where it came from my grandfather. But my mother had a terrible life. Her mother died when she was born, and she didn't have a good life at all at home. And at 14, she ran away from home and went to Devonport to start off with. After that, I think she went to Hobart. So that was my mother's life. My father came from a very big family. I think there were about 13 children. And although they were a happy lot, the rebels, and they lived down Penguin, South Rihanna, up all down round about that area, and they were farmers.
Right. They all came out from England?
My grandfather came from England, yes, but he met my grandmother in Penguin or Ulverston, down that way somewhere. So she was a Tasmanian, my grandmother, but my grandfather was an Englishman.
Right.
And he came from, is there a place called Norfolk in England? Sort of sounds familiar. I know my mother came from the centre part of England, a place called Ashby de la Zouch, and that was in the centre part of England. So, but anyway, that's
And
where,
what were they doing there?
I don't know what my grandparents did. I don't know what my grandfather did. When he came to Tasmania, he was a farmer. So I guess they were farming in England.
Yep.
And I think had a pretty hard life. But he had a farm out of Penguin, up in the South Rihanna, I think, outside Penguin.
Right.
He was a lovely old man.
And what about some of the people who lived in Latrobe there that you got to know that everybody knows about, like the Bulldog family?
Oh yes, the Bulldogs, they lived up in the part of town that I think we called it Earl Town, right up the top part of Latrobe, right up the very end. And there were quite a few of them. I went to school with some of the Bulldogs. So I guess I knew, is he a footballer? Or?
Yeah, Darryl Ball.
Yeah, his parents, I would have known his parents.
Okay.
And the members of his family quite well. We all went to the same school.
Okay. Tell us the story about the Savoys.
Oh, the Savoys. Every Saturday night, my mother would give me, I think it was 1 shilling or 2 shillings, I can't remember, but I was sent to the local, well, we call it a delicatessen now, I don't know what we called it in those days, but I always bought half a dozen Savoys for 2 shillings. And one Saturday night, I had the Savoys in a paper bag, and I came up, we had one long main street in Latrobe, and I was coming home with the Savoys in the paper bag, and I was swinging them around and singing away at the top of my voice, coming up the street, and all of a sudden, as we were passing the railway yards, I was swinging the paper bag around, and out came the Saveloys over the fence down into the railway yard. And I lost all the Saveloys. I went down there trying to find them in the dark, but I couldn't. So I had to go home and report that I'd lost the Saveloys. My mother was furious, because 2 shillings was a lot of money in those days. And I had to go back and ask for more Saveloys. And the lady said, "But I just sold you some Saveloys." "I know, but I lost them." We had our Saturday night Saveloys. That was our usual Saturday night tea.
Now, what about when you had to go and get your father from the pub?
Oh,
And all of that, what went on with that?
10-year-old, I was often up at the pub. There were 3 pubs in Latrobe. The top, Peacock's, Lord's in the middle, and the bottom pub. And I was sent to the pubs to find my father and bring him home, because he'd been drinking. So 9 or 10 o'clock, I'd bring my father home, and well, that was just the way of life. It happened often. My father was a very popular man. Everyone in the town knew him and liked him, but he drank on Saturday night, and that was the only time. He stuck to his job. He did a good job as a baker through the week, but on a Saturday night, that was his night out. And
did they sometimes get you to sing?
oh yes, often I would, when I was sent up 10 o'clock, they would put me on the hotel bar, and I would sing to all the men in the pub. Oh dear.
Yes.
So, yeah, my singing career. So I was well known in Latrobe too.
Yes.
So, yes, all the men knew me.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that was good. It was all friendly. And my father was a very popular man.
Mm.
So,
And what about, was there a time when your mum was away for a weekend or something? And
oh golly, my mother often, I say often, my mother had a few health problems, and she'd come over to Melbourne, to Geelong, for treatment on her, for her nose. I think it was nasal trouble. And she did that a few times. And so when my mother was away, on the Saturday night, my father would invite all of his friends to the house, because when Mum was home, we would never have anybody come and visit. But as soon as Mum disappeared, we had the men in the men that he met with in the bar. We had them in our lounge room. We had quite a nice house. My mother was a very good housekeeper, and we had nice furniture. We had a nice home, and we had a lovely big fireplace, and they would all come and drink and sit around the fireplace, and I was there watching all this, usually sent to bed a bit later than usual, but I saw all the goings on. And if the cricket was on in England, we had a radio. And not too many people in Latrobe had radios, but we had one. So they'd all come and we'd listen to the cricket, broadcast from England.
Okay.
That was how they'd spend the evening. And of course they all had their bottles of beer, but I was never given any. But, but as I say, my father was a popular man. He had lots of friends, but had my mother walked in, there would have been a real Barney. Oh dear.
Yes.
I don't know if she ever knew that happened while she was away. I can remember taking morning and afternoon tea and lunches climbing this jolly hill, taking food up to him because he grew vegetables. He had a cow. My father was amazing. He had he was able to do anything.
Right. So does that mean he owned that land, or did he rent it?
I think we rented it from somebody. I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
It was quite a big plot of land. He grew potatoes. He sold them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he sold them. He was a good gardener. He had lots of vegetables. Yeah. And I'd have to climb this jolly hill and take up a thermos and something for him to eat. Huh! Oh dear. Prince was my collie dog. I think I was 4. And we used to go, we'd wander with, I can remember sitting in the doorway of some of the shops, and people had to walk over us or around us because the Johnny dog and I would sit in the main doorway of the stores. And everyone in the town knew me. I just used to wander everywhere. And one day we sat in the middle of the town. There was a railway line that went across the main road. And Prince and I sat in the middle of the train line, there in the middle of the road. Prince and I sat. I can still see us there. And Mr. Butler, the man right at the top of the town, was the only person that Prince would let near him. Otherwise, no one was allowed to touch me. He wouldn't allow them. But Mr. Butler, he knew him, and he was able to take me away from that train line. The train line went across the main road.
Right.
The town shops, were each side.
Okay.
But the railway line went through the middle. And there we sat.
Where the road crossed the railway line?
Yeah.
Oh, right on the crossing.
Right on the railway crossing, the pair of us sat. And Mr. Butler had to come and move us. I just wandered everywhere. I don't know what my mother was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was 4, I think, when Werner arrived. But I just used to wander the town, so everybody knew me. But at the age of 4, but we lived in the centre of the town.
Right. And
So
what happened to the dog?
we lost him because of my father again. At the hotel he had a bet with somebody, and we lost Prince. He had to give in Prince because of this bet he had with this other person. And that was how come he and Prince ended up down Ulverston with this person. That was a great sadness in my life to lose him.
Mm.
But I was really very young.
And you said that on one of your travels, you saw the dog again.
Yes, we were driving through the town. And we were sort of privileged. Not too many people had cars. And we were driving. We'd been down to Penguin or Burnie because I had so many relatives. And here we were driving home late afternoon, and there was Prince on the footpath, and he saw the car. And he came tearing across the road. I opened the car door and he hopped into the car. And we brought him home, but the people found out that we'd got Prince, we had Prince back, and because they wanted the dog. He was a beautiful dog. So Prince had to go. I lost Prince.
And what about holidays with cousins?
Yes, school holidays. I didn't have any brothers. And every school holiday I would go either to Penguin, where there were lots of boy cousins. I'd go to Rocky Cape, that's down Stanley Way. Once again, there were 2 or 3 boy cousins down there. I must have been keen on boys, I think, because I used to love staying with them. And the boys used to take me out in Rocky Cape. my uncle worked on the railways, and they used to have, I don't know what they call them, trolleys on the railway line. You worked the trolleys up and down, and the boys and I used to get on these trolleys, and because no trains on Sunday in Tasmania then, and we'd have a marvellous time up and down on the railway line on these things with who was there? There was Roy and Max and Rex. That's right, their brothers down there in Rocky Cape. We had a wonderful time with those boys, and or I did, because I was the only one. I don't remember Verna being there, but I suppose she was 4 years younger than me, so maybe she just didn't take part in all those things. And then often I would go to Penguin, where once again I had lots of cousins, because in those days they had big families, 7, 8, 9 children. So I had lots of cousins, and I had a wonderful time with them. I only had 2 girl cousins there in Penguin, and the rest were boys. And me not having any brothers, I enjoyed that. We'd go swimming, we'd climb trees. Oh dear, my uncle had a big trucking business, and they had a huge backyard, and there was also there was a big tree, and we'd climb up this tree. Midnight, we used to have midnight suppers, because my aunt and uncle, he was the warden of the town, and they employed a cook, and I believe her name was Effie, and she'd cook all these cakes, and we would, at midnight, we'd take all this stuff down to this big tree. We'd sit up in the branches, or we'd be down on the ground. I had a wonderful time, and I used to love going there for holidays. That was at Penguin. I did have cousins too in Burnie, but that wasn't quite so exciting. But yes, I remember my white pleated skirt. My mother had made it, but I went climbing trees with the boys and the 2 girls, and I ripped it. Oh dear. I've never forgotten the trouble I got into, because my mother was a good sewer, and she had made this lovely skirt, but I climbed a tree and tore it. Oh dear. But yes, I had a good time as a child with all my cousins. Or we'd go to Studley, up in the farm, up near Sheffield. There I would get on horses, all the farm implements they had. And my aunt was a great cook, and they used to employ farmhands, and we'd sit at this huge table, and we'd have the farmhands and eat all this food. Oh dear, I remember this long table, and it was the same down there at Penguin. We had this long dining table, and because with 7 children in one family, there were heaps of it, so I had a good time as a child with all my cousins. And we had a motor car, of course. I mean, we were sort of rather privileged, my father having such a good job and able to have a car, the Ford it was, a Ford car. I can remember the flapping windows.
Was it a Model T? Or?
It could have been, yes, a T Ford, yeah. Okay. And in those days you didn't have glass windows, you had sort of a perspex, or I'm not sure what you call them.
Some plastic sort of thing.
Plastic sort of windows in the early stage.
Okay.
I can remember those windows. Eventually, of course, they got glass. So I suppose in a way I was rather privileged, although I never thought of it at the time. But I never wanted for a thing My mother was a good sewer. I had plenty of clothes. But yeah, I did. I had a pretty good childhood, except my mother and father fought like tigers. So my mother had a very bad temper. Ah, dear. But
now, what about when all your cousins and the war? Did they all went to?
well, the war came and that changed life completely. What was I, 14, 15? I'm not really sure. And of course, all the boy cousins disappeared. The boys from Rocky Cape went into the Navy. All the boys at Penguin went into the Army. One of them went into the Air Force. They all disappeared. But every one of them came home.
Right.
Not one of them was killed.
Mm.
Yes, the Army, the Air Force and the Navy. Two of them in particular, the boys who were in the Navy used to write to me all the time during the war. That was great. I was great mates with those boys from Rocky Cape.
Mm.
So, but they all came home, which was
Mm.
great.
Mm.
So we didn't lose any of them.
And then you got it. Or you're going to say something?
No. I mean, the town was very different when the war was on. There was no menfolk around,
Okay.
and the town was quite different. And I remember when Charlie Knight, the police constable's son, was killed during the war, and the whole town, went into a state of bereavement. I can still feel and see the sadness, because Latrobe was a one-street town, and everyone knew everyone, and the whole town was in a state of bereavement. I remember that so plainly, because Charlie was killed during the war.
Mm.
And of course all my cousins, all the men, they all went to the war as well. Life seemed to change.
Right.
After the war, things weren't the same. And, well, that was, what was I, 18, 19 when I left.
Right.
I decided.
But when while the war was going on, you got a job?
Yes, I first of all, I worked for the local doctor, and he said to me one day, Aileen, there's a job going at the post office as they want to train telephonists. I think you should, there was an exam coming up. He said, I think you should sit for that exam and try and get the job as a telephonist. So I did as the doctor told me. I worked for Dr. Stevens. I used to answer the phone and do all sorts of funny little jobs for him. But anyway, I sat for the exam and I got the job. So I worked as a telephonist in the Latrobe post office.
Right.
And that was good, yes. I had a great time there. I remember when peace was declared, I was on duty in the morning shift. And peace was declared. It must have been 10, 11 o'clock or something when the news came, and everyone went crazy. Everybody rang at the same time. The switchboard was a big board and little shutters fell down when people rang to talk to somebody. All the shutters fell down. Everybody rang at once. I was on duty, but I was due to go off. And the other girl who came in the door, and she put her arms around the switchboard cords. I don't know, the board would have been 4 foot, 5 foot long, maybe longer. She got hold of the cords, one end, and reached her arm around the other end, and she disconnected everybody, and she said, peace is declared, peace is declared. And of course the board went crazy because everyone had been disconnected. She was due on in about 10 minutes' time, but when she did that, I said, "You did it, you fix it." And I walked out and left her there. I don't know how she got on, but that was her reaction to peace being declared. Gosh, I'll never forget that. But anyway, so I went out into the street and all the people were crazy, going crazy because peace was declared.
Mm.
So that was a good time.
The boat trips, different boat trips.
Oh yes, well we did come across to Victoria a few times because my mother had family over here, sisters, and we used to come across on the boat. Oh dear, those dreadful trips. We were all seasick, and the Narana, the Taruna, I can't remember any others, but it was so rough sometimes, and we were all dreadfully seasick. Yes.
So you came to Geelong for those holidays?
We stayed in Geelong, yes, where once again I had a wonderful time. I had my boy cousins there, so I was very happy. They'd take me swimming. I think they taught me to swim at the Eastern Geelong beach. That's where we used to swim. And I had a great time with them. It's funny, I can remember we'd go down the main street and we'd buy frozen pieces of pineapple. We'd buy frozen slices of pineapple and we'd be eating them going up the street. That's a strange thing, but that's what we used to do.
Mm.
And so I used to like going to Geelong. I had one girl cousin and the rest were boys once again. So yeah, we had a good time. We'd swim on the East Geelong beach, and I had an uncle who was a great favourite. I really used to like Uncle Eric, that was his name, and they had a big family too. So everywhere I went, there was always a big family, boys and girls.
Mm.
So I really had a good time with my relatives' place. I was very active in the church. I think I was the church organist. I'd always been in the church, Sunday school, then Sunday school teacher, and as soon as, I think I was 14 when they placed me on the organ and the piano, and because not too many young people learned a musical instrument. So once again, I was very privileged. But yes, so the church played a great big part in my life, really. And I must have driven the ministers and their wives crazy because I was constantly knocking on their door. And I remember the Baptist church manse was a big house with a great long passage. I remember that passage. But I used to spend a lot of time. I must have driven them crazy. Oh. But, well, I was a church girl, and my life did revolve around the church a lot.
Mm.
Yes.
So what happened there, and you came, and your decision to come to Melbourne?
But at 19 I'd had enough of the small town talk. I also had a boyfriend. The bike riders used to come to town, come to Latrobe every Christmas.
Because they had the Latrobe wheel or something.
The Latrobe wheel race. It was a big.
Okay.
It was a big thing, big biking affair.
Right.
For I don't know whether it was days or what. I've forgotten now. But bike riders came from all over Australia to compete. And of course this guy, I met this guy, and he caused a bit of havoc in my life. My mother thought it was wonderful, but I soon discovered he wasn't so wonderful. And, oh dear me, we had a big row over that. And, yeah, Arthur, his name was Arthur. Oh dear. And we became engaged, so I was engaged to him. And then I came to Melbourne. I was trying to get rid of Arthur. I wanted to break it off because I knew he wasn't right for me. And he was one of the reasons I came to Melbourne.
Right.
Because I was desperately trying to get rid of him, and I couldn't. So I came, and of course he followed. He used to come and visit me at Dot Cook's house eventually when I went to stay with her. But I was able to eventually fob him off. But yeah. And I became engaged. I had an engagement ring. My mother was horrified. She liked him. She really liked Arthur. I went to New South Wales, met his parents.
Oh, okay. Right.
He had a sister. Yeah, I met his parents, lovely people. But I knew it wasn't right. And I had a real job breaking it off. Oh, it was a terrible time.
So eventually you came to Melbourne anyway?
Yes, I was 19. I think I'd had enough of the silly gossips. I'd had boyfriends, and so I decided that I would come to Melbourne. My mother had lots of relatives over here, my father too. And they said yes, they were very happy for me to come and stay with them. So that's what I did. So I stayed, first of all, Port Melbourne with an aunt. And I got a job with Kelly and Lewis out at Footscray. Worked on the switchboard as a telephonist. And then Dot Cook, my cousin, thought that I should be going more to church. Because when I stayed with the Port Melbourne folk, I never went to church down there. But Dot Cook thought it was time that I got back into my church habit. So she suggested I come and live with her, which I did. And she lived in South Yarra. And there I went to Spring Street Mission. And there was another less boarding with Dot Cook, Corrie Oliver.
Okay.
And she had a brother, Ray, and he'd just come out of the army. He was still in his army uniform. What did they call it when they came out? Anyway, he was no longer in the army, but he had to wear his army uniform for a little while, and then he was able to get rid of the army uniform. And I was still working over at Footscray, I think, as a switchboard operator. And I remember he had a bike, and he used to double dink me down to the railway station to catch the train. And because when he came out of the army, he didn't have work to start off with. And there he'd be when I got home from work, and he'd double dink me on the bike back to Hardy Street, to Dot Cook's place where I was boarding. So that was how I met Ray, through boarding at Hardy Street there in South Yarra. And Corrie lived there too. And I don't know, the romance seemed to blossom immediately as soon as we met, because he discovered I could play the piano. Another fortunate thing. Not too many other girls learnt the piano, but I did. And so, of course, I was playing at the church. That's something. In those days, when they discovered you could play, you always ended up in the church playing the organ or the piano. And, well, on a Sunday night, all the young people from the Spring Street Mission came to Dot's place. She'd put on supper for them all, and there was a host of them. They'd all come to Dot's place. I would be on the piano, or organ, I've forgotten what it was she had. I think it was the piano. And I'd play and everybody would sing. And we had a marvellous time. And of course, Ray was there and they discovered that he could sing, I could sing. And of course, that's how we started off singing duets.
Okay.
From then on, we sang practically every Sunday. And I can still remember Jeffrey, sometimes when it was announced that Ray and I were going to sing, Jeffrey would creep into himself, fold up into a little ball, and probably say to himself, "Oh, not again." I remember that.
Yes.
But we did. And of course it wasn't only at Spring Street Mission. We sang in Collins Street Baptist. We went all over the place singing.
Wow.
But that was great. That was great. We enjoyed doing that. And of course, 3 children came along. But Ray being a builder, we started off in a little tiny single-fronted cottage in Paran. I think it cost us $400. £400 it would have been in those days. I think, from memory, it was 400. And that was the money his sister-in-law had saved from his army pay. That's right. He wouldn't give his army pay to his father because he didn't trust his father. So he got his sister-in-law to save all of his army pay. That's right. It was £400. And we put this £400 on this tiny single-fronted house in Paran. And that was the beginning of us buying and doing up houses, because it went on from there to quite a few houses. We moved.
Mm.
And always making a profit. We did very well. And I don't know how many houses we moved to. Paran, Hawthorne. Oh dear, we had 2 different houses in Hawthorne. Oh dear, yeah, we did move a lot. But anyway.
That's all right. So how many years after all of that would your mum and Nana and Pa, how long after all that did they come over?
Well, I think we had Colin.
Oh, okay.
Maybe even had Joy.
So it was quite a bit later.
It was a few years later, yes. Maybe it was just Colin, because we lived in this single-fronted house. Yeah. I mean, we had begun then well, yes. No, we were still in the single-fronted house. Yeah, and my mother and father decided that they should come over here because I seemed to get on okay and be perfectly happy and really enjoying myself, so they thought they'd come over too. I think my father missed me.
Right.
I think he had, and also he had trouble at work. Something happened at his work, and I think he was, because he'd been the baker there for years, and the young guy whom my father trained to be a baker took his job. He was a young guy. And Dad was supposed to work under Jack, his name was, Jack Clark. And my father refused to work under him.
Right.
And so he left.
Right.
So he had to bike every day down to Devonport to a job down there as a baker. How on earth he did that, I'll never know. So that was too much, so that eventually they moved to Devonport to live. And,
I remember him being in Pascoe Vale with a bike. So he still rode his bike.
He liked his bike, yes. Wow. Yes, he had a bike when he was older. Yeah. Yeah, my father quieted down once they came to Melbourne to live. In Tassie, he had all of his boozy mates.
Mm.
He was a very popular man.
Mm.
Had so many friends.
So was he still a baker when he came to Melbourne?
Well, I went looking for a job for him.
Right.
But we lived in Paran or Hawthorne, I've forgotten now, Paran perhaps. And I saw a job advertised And I rang the man and I said, my father is a very good baker. Could he have the job if I can get him across from Tassie? That's right, I've forgotten that. Yes. And he said, yes, he said, he said, you say he's a good baker? He hadn't seen me, met me.
Right.
But I told him, I assured him my father was a good baker.
Mm.
And he said, all right, he said, your father can have the job. So I said, right, I'll get them over here. So I rang them. How I did that, I don't know. Maybe my parents had the phone on by then. And I said, well, I've got a job for you, and I've got a house. Because Ray worked with a guy who owned a house in Pascoe Vale. And the house was empty and it was up for rent. So I said to him, can I have it for my parents?
Right.
It was Pascoe Vale. We were praying. That was difficult, but it was a house. You couldn't get houses in those days. So I rang them and Dad gave notice, they packed, they sold the house, came. It all happened very quickly.
Mm.
It all fell into place.
Mm.
And because I had a house for them to move into, they sent some of their furniture over, and that's how it all happened. But it was me behind it all the time, doing these things.
Mm. Mm.
But anyway, it all worked out. He got a good job, but it was difficult in that they lived in Pascoe Vale and I was Prahran, Hawthorne. I mean, they never knew where I was going to end up because we moved so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course we had the trip to New Guinea, Ray.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Ray and I, the Baptists were wanting missionaries to go to New Guinea. So we thought, well, we could do that because we were very involved in the church, the Baptist church. And we said, yes, we could go to New Guinea. And we did. We went there for 3 years. And Ray loved it. He absolutely loved it up there. He loved the people loved him. And
You'd been up there during the war, but...
Yeah, probably, well, during the war he was in the islands. But he really did love it up there. But of course, then we discovered that he was ill and had cancer. So of course, we really meant to go for the rest of the term of our natural life. Whatever was left, we were prepared to go to New Guinea. But he became ill, so that finished that. And it was a great experience. We both loved it up there. It was a wonderful time. And I'm so glad we did it. We really saw a bit of how the other half lives up there. It was a great experience.
And then eventually, anyway, you came to meet Peter.
Eventually, I was a widow. Ray died in, 79? Yeah. He was only, 55 or something when he died. And I was a widow 5 or 6 years. And then I met and married Peter.
Think of that?
Yeah, Peter. What year were we married?
84.
84. Yes, 84.
So it's been a long life with lots of experiences.
Yeah, lots of ups and downs, but I really have had a very fortunate life. A very
And you've had good health.
Oh, well, I've been in and out of
hospital. You've had every operation you can have.
I've had every operation that you could, anyone could possibly have. There can't be too much left inside me. But I seem to have survived them all, and here we are, nearly 85.
Very good.
I've come through all the ops and everything else remarkably well, really. So I've had a very fortunate life.